Hello everyone, welcome to episode 2 in my Lua tutorial series. In this video, I'm going to be covering the operators, all of them in Lua, and we're going to be talking about variables part 2, which should be a fairly quick topic. So for this video, it's actually going to be pretty short because I do plan on getting through the operators pretty quickly as well. Also, I changed my format up a little bit for starting out these videos. I'm not going to have the terminology section here anymore. It's just a little bit too much to keep up with while I'm recording, and it just ends up kind of confusing me, and I have to stop the recording and go back to see if I miss any keywords. So, if you guys still want to have like a list of keywords that I mention in the video, which could just be words that maybe you don't know the definition of, or you want to have a reference to, then like leave a comment, and I'll go ahead and like list out all of the words that I think might need some extra explaining. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start with our operators here. Again, this is going to be a pretty short video. The first, I guess, subcategory or subset of the operators are logical operators. And if you're not that new to computing, or you've come from maybe more of a hardware-oriented place, then you can also, these are also referred to as the logic gates. Your basic logic gates, you have and, or not, which you can use to construct more complex logic gates like XOR or what have you. So these are going to be the logical operators. There's also Lua doesn't have an actual ternary operator in of itself, but you can also use these logical operators as kind of a as a ternary operator. So you can say, X and Y or Z, and stuff like that. Alright, so let me start off by first addressing two new vocab words here, which you may or may not have heard before. But that's going to be truthy and falsy values. And I'll get into more about how that works after the first example I'm going to give here. But basically, in any language, truthy or falsy means a value that is evaluated as true or false. So in the case of Lua, any value or any variable that is not defined as nil or false is thereby considered truthy. And with the same logic, any value that is defined as nil or false is considered falsy. And typically this is used, they're evaluated in if statements or logical operations like, an and, an or a not statement, or any kind of situation where it's being expressed as a logical statement. Now, just holding on to that information real quick, I am going to give examples of that, but first, I think it would be easier to understand how these operators work by just using strictly Boolean values, or just true, false, and nil as examples. So I'm going to go ahead and go down a few lines here, and let's start with the and statement. So, or the and operator. I'm going to be using operator, statement, logic gate interchangeably. They all basically mean the same thing. So I'm going to be giving an example of and first, and we're just going to do this in a print function here so we can see it in the output window. So and actually works the exact same in programming as it does if you were to use it just in spoken English. Basically, it's a way of determining whether or not you're going to have a true outcome, or any outcome, if both of the and statement's conditions are true. So if you say, I need to put my shoes on and my shirt on before I go outside, what you're saying is, those two conditions need to be met, they need to be true, before you can go outside. And if one of those conditions are not met, then you cannot go outside. So, and that's a very important concept. So if you don't have shoes, but you do have a shirt, you can't go outside. If you have a shirt, but you don't have shoes, you also can't go outside. You can only go outside if both of those conditions are true. So, and is, I'll say and will be true if both of its operands are true. And again, I don't know if I explained this, but operands are essentially the values that an operator is dealing with. So, and the format for the AND operator is going to be X and Y. So that's the actual syntax of that operator. So I'm going to go ahead and print true and true. So I have two true values here. You could say that they're truly, but in reality they're actually just definitively true. If I run this, we're going to get true in the output window because both conditions are true. So I run that, and you see we have true. If I changed one of these to false, that breaks our criteria that both of these have to be true in order to get a true result. So, you know, if I run this, now we're going to get false. If I keep this as true, but I change the other one to false, we're going to get the same thing, false. And of course, if both of them are true, if both of them are false, then we're still going to get false in the output window. So the AND operator is only going to be true or return a certain value if both of its operands are truthy. So, and I'll go ahead and put that in a comment there. So let's go ahead and I guess we'll continue on using just plain Boolean logic before we get into the actual truly and falsy examples. So that's AND. Let's talk about OR. OR is the opposite of AND, where only one condition has to be true or one condition has to be met in order to return true or return a certain value. So in this case, OR will return true if one or more, I'll say one or more values are true. And again, the syntax of OR is going to be X or Y. And I'll go ahead and just have that syntax prefix there here. And let's give a print example. So if, again, we could take the example of, you know, going outside. If you only want to go outside if you have shoes or a shirt on, then if you have a shirt but no shoes on, then you can go outside. Or if you have a shoes but no shirt, then you can go outside. But one of those conditions still has to be true in order for the output to be true. If you don't have shoes or a shirt, if both of those are false, then you cannot go outside. So if I say true or true, that's going to be true. If I say false or true, that's still going to be true, because remember, we have at least one true value. So I'm just going to put in parentheses, have at least one true / truthy value. So that's going to return true. And if I make that false, or the other one true, it doesn't matter which side the true or false value is on, because these operators are only concerned with the fact that one of them is truthy and one of them is falsy. So it doesn't matter what order they're in. And so if I run this, we're going to get true as expected. And if it's false or false, I actually don't know if I just demonstrated this, but if it's false or false, then it's going to be false. So that's how the OR operator works. And I think I already explained not a little bit. You know, it's basically just the inverter. So if you have a value, it's going to invert that value. Of course, it's going to be true or false. So I'm going to say considered the inverter. It will take a truthy or truthy or falsy value and return the opposite. And the syntax is the not operator only has one operand, so the syntax is just going to be not x, and that's just going to return the opposite Boolean value of x. And a print example here would be if I said not true, just like in English, if you say something is not true, I'm going to run this, that makes it false. And if I say not false, and I run that, then it's going to be true. So pretty simple. Now, it gets a little bit more... these are all really, really basic because we're actually using the hard-coded, Boolean values. But now that we're going to start getting into real truthy and falsy examples. So, again, truthy and falsy just means values that are not... Or I'm sorry, truthy means, well, you can go back in the video. I'm not going to re-explain it. I have to be careful not to repeat myself too much. But yeah, so we already know what those are. So I'm just going to make a variable here called value. I'm going to set that equal to a string. Why not? Call that hello world. So as I said before, this value would be considered truthy because it is defined as not nil or not false. So it is neither false or nil, which means that it is truthy. So that means that if I use this in one of these operations here, then it's going to be essentially supplemented for true. So if I say print value and false, this is essentially being translated to true and false. Now there is a difference, and the difference is that if my value is truthy, instead of just returning true, it's actually going to return the Lua value itself, which is whatever it's defined as. So in this case, it's defined as a string which says hello world. So if both of these are going to be true, then it would return, well, again, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. So if I run this, we should see that, first of all, this is still going to print false because the criteria for an AND operation is that both values must be true. So if I run this, you can see we get false. If I go ahead and change this false value to true, though, and I run it, we're not actually going to get the value of my variable here because the way Lua reads this is it's only going to return the second operand if both of its operands are truthy. This is kind of contrary to what I was saying before about order not mattering. It still doesn't matter in terms of evaluation, but if you want a certain value to be returned out of this statement, then you should have, whatever value you want to be returned at the very end, tailing your statement. So if I just switch these placements real quick, and I say I put true here, and I put value here, instead of getting true printed out, it's going to say, okay, this is true, and value is truthy, and value is my second operand here, so go ahead and return what value equals, which is this string right here. So if I run this, you can see we get the actual value of this variable. And so, again, if I make this false, then this is not going to be evaluated because our first condition is false, and so it's just going to return false if I run this. So there you go. I hope I'm not making this too confusing, but I'm trying to explain this as well as possible to people who might have absolutely zero knowledge of logic gates. And one more example with AND is if I just have two truthy values that aren't just, Boolean. So if I just put value and value, as long as value is truthy, this is always going to return value. So if I run that, you can see we get... Alright, so now moving on to the OR example. It's pretty similar to how AND works in terms of evaluating whether or not something is truthy or falsy. But unlike the AND operator that's just always going to return its second operand no matter what, the OR operator will actually return the first truthy value that it finds. So it doesn't matter what order, per se, the operands are in, as long as, you just want to make sure that if you want to return one truthy operator before another one, that you have that written before it in the actual statement. And I'll give an example of that. So if I say print value or false, then in this case, we only have one truthy value, which is here, right, value. And if I run that, it's going to print whatever value equals. And if I switch the order, if I say print false or value, and I run this, then again, we're going to get the same result because it's just going to say, okay, well, we don't want false because we want to favor true the values, so return that. Now, if I say true or value, this is where it gets a little bit nitpicky. So, and this is fine. Either way is valid. It just depends on what you want for your use case. So if I want to return true first over value, let's say that we don't actually know if this is going to be true, and if I run this, then it's going to return true first. But if I put value or true, then it's going to return value first. So it just depends on what you actually want to return first. And this is useful in many ways. It's very commonly used when you have circumstances where you're not sure if some data is going to exist, and it's kind of a way to set a default kind of value. So let's say, for example, we actually didn't know if this my variable here is going to be truthy or not. So maybe it is going to be false or nil. And so I can kind of almost set a default value by saying, I can come down to the next line here and say that value is equal to value or some default value. So what I'm doing here, and this might seem like a lot, but I'll address this. What I'm doing here is I'm basically just doing the same thing that I've been doing in my print statements. So whenever you're using a logical operator, whatever result you get from that operator is returned to the place that it was stated in. So this is a completely valid assignment, because what I'm saying is that value, and I'm just putting this in parentheses just so that you see that it's, one value. What I'm saying is that value, my variable value, is equal to what it was equal to before, or this new default value string. And so if value was nil or false before, then it's going to say, okay, let's skip over this and see if our next operand is truthy, and if it is, that's going to be what it returns. So it's basically saying value is equal to itself, or if it's falsy, in other words, if it's nil or false, then it's equal to this. So I'm going to go ahead and just print what value is. And so in this case, we're basically just saying, right now this translates to hello world, or default value. And in this case, both are truthy, so it's just going to return the first truthy value, which is this one. So if I run this, it's just going to say print hello world. But if I set value to false, then it's going to say, okay, value is equal to false or default value. And so it's going to pick the truthy of the two. So if I run this, you can see we're going to get a default value. And if I just don't assign anything to value at all, which means it's nil, and I run this, you can see we're still going to get default value because in this case, value becomes nil. And last but not least, the not operator, or the inverter, is just going to take any kind of data type and just determine whether or not it's truthy or falsy, then return the opposite of that. So if I say not value, then it's going to return false because value in this case is indeed truthy. So if I run that, we get false. And if I get rid of value, if I never define it, of course, it's going to say true because value will be nil. Not nil translates to not false or true. So that's going to be true. All right, so now on to the last section of logical operators, which I spent a lot more time on than I wanted to, but it's fine. I'll just make it like a 4 or 5-parter video on operators. But anyway, the last section is going to be on combinations of all of the operators that we just talked about, all the logical operators. So it's going to be combining nots and ors and ands, and you can do it in any kind of way that you want to have any kind of logic system to produce a result that you might not want to do with a bunch of if statements, which we'll get into later. And we're also going to talk about precedence, which is pretty simple in this case because the only operator precedence here, which by the way just means which operators get evaluated first when you're combining them together. It's pretty simple because not is the only operation that's going to be evaluated first. Other than that, it just becomes a matter of ands and ors. So my first example is just going to be a combination of a not operation with an and operation. So if I say something like not false and hello world, what's happening here is Lua is first going to take a look at this expression and say, all right, we have an inversion here, not false, so let's go ahead and take care of that first, evaluate that first. And it's going to say, okay, so not false means true, so it's just going to take this and change that to true. And then this would be the simplified version of that expression. So print true and hello world. And in this case, if we actually ran this, which I'll do right now, it's going to print hello world because that's our second operand. And as we discussed before, the and statement is just going to return what's at the very end of it. And the same thing works with or. So if I say not false or hello world, it's actually going to print true because, again, this translates to, it's going to evaluate not false first, which is true. So it's going to say true or hello world. And as I mentioned before, or statements are just going to return the very first true value that it assesses. So in this case, the first one that it finds is true, so it's just going to return true. And so if I run that, we just get true. If I change this to not true, which means that this is now false, so I'll change that to false, then it would return hello world. So if I run that, we get hello world. All right, now we're going to move on to using ands and ors together. Now, as I mentioned before, and I'm gonna go ahead and leave a note of this so I don't confuse myself, and least of all you guys. So the not operator takes precedence over ands and ors. So what's going to be evaluated first? You can kind of think of this as the order of operations for logical operators. So we can call this like the order of operations for logical operators. So the first operator that's going to be assessed is not. The next one is going to be and then or comes very last. So if I say print true and false or false and true, this might be kind of an eyesore, but if I put parentheses around the operators that are actually taking precedence, it actually becomes a lot simpler. So what's actually going on here is that Lua is going to say, it's going to group all of the ands together, and then whatever is left, in this case, is just going to be an or statement. That's the simplified expression. So what it's being read as is this, which is, it's going to say true and false, evaluate that, false and true, evaluate that, and then whatever those values are, you're going to OR them together. So I'm going to remove these parentheses here. So this first expression, true and false, again, the whole point of an AND statement is that it's only going to be true if both conditions are true. So this is going to be false, and this is going to be false. So it's boiling down to saying false or false. So when we run this, our output is going to be false, as you can see here. Now if I make one of these true, like this last AND statement here, now what it's saying is false or true. So if we run that, then we're going to get true here. And I could even take this one step further and say true and some value, just to prove that this is actually what's going on here. So this is going to say, again, this is going to be false, and this is going to say true and some value. And so because some value is truthy, and it's at the end of our AND operation, that's what's going to be returned. So it's saying it's saying false or some value. And this OR statement is going to then simplify to choosing some value over false because some value is true. So if I run that, we get some value. Now, when in doubt, if you don't want to have to memorize this operator precedence or order of operations, you don't have to. There's always the option of using parentheses, which will explicitly tell you or tell the program to do that first. And you can do this with any kind of operator in Lua. Any of the operators up here, you can use parentheses with any of them. It just means that it's going to you're telling the program to do that first no matter what. So if I really wanted to make this clear to myself, maybe I forget what order this is going to be running in the future, then I could just put parentheses around my my AND expressions here so that I know that these are being evaluated first and then the OR comes after that. So I would always recommend using parentheses when possible. Even if you remember operator precedence, it's very likely that you'll forget it in the future because it's just, sometimes you just can't be bothered or you really just, don't want to have to go back and reference something. So I would just use explicit parentheses whenever possible. Alright, so I'm going to give one more example before I end the video on logical operators. And this is just going to be, incorporating everything, nots, ands, and ors together. So you can see what it actually looks like. So I'm just going to come up with something on the spot. We'll say not false or false and true. We'll say truly just so it's not that confusing. Or not true and false. Okay, so even I don't know what the hell is going on right now. So let's go. let's recap here. So first of all, our nots are going to be evaluated first. So we have not false, which is true, and not true, which is false. So let's see, and then we're going to do our ands. So we have false and true. Let me go ahead and write this down as I'm going. So not false is true. And then we're going to ignore this OR statement for now because we see that we have an AND operation. So we're going to do the AND first. So we have true or false and true, which is going to be false because we have a false in our AND statement, so it's going to return false. So it's going to say, we're saying or false. And then we have another or, not true, which is false, and false. So we're saying or false and false. So this should be, if I didn't make any mistakes, which I'm not guaranteeing, this should be what it translates to. So now it's just a matter of ors and ands. So we have true or false and false. And so again, we have another and here, so we're going to want to evaluate that. I think I might have actually made a mistake, but it's fine. If I did, we'll go back and correct it. So false and false is just going to be false. And so now we have true or false or false. And so it's just going to return the value of true. So we should see that this prints true if we run this, which it does. Okay. So I'm pretty sure I didn't make any mistakes in that deduction, but I could be wrong. We could have just gotten lucky. But I'm pretty sure I didn't. But anyway, you can use the tools that I explained previously to go back and verify this if you don't want to take my word for it, which I totally get. But yeah, I guess, it's kind of fun to practice this kind of stuff. If you really want to get the memorization of this precedence down. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for this video. Like I said, it was much longer than I expected it to be. I'm very sorry for that. I wanted to cover all of these operators in this video, plus variables part 2, which is not going to happen. So operators, it's going to be its own kind of sub-series in this series. It's going to be I'm probably going to make a video on every one of those topics. So yeah, I hope this at least it was in depth. At least, I don't know. I'm trying here. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video.